And because of several technical issues, we are going to start with our second one, and Diego Luna Quintanilla. Francesco is able not to present here and to introduce him properly.
Yes, hello everybody. So Diego Luna Quintanilla is an architect, urban planner, whose career spans between the two sides of the Atlantic. He was born in Colombia, studied in Venezuela, and then moved to Europe, where he graduated from a European postgraduate master in urbanism at University of Delft, TU, and as well as UAV. Currently, he lives in Belgium, and he is working for BUR, or BUUR. I don't know the exact pronunciation of Urban Planning Office. Is an international office based in Belgium, and as a project leader, urban designer, Diego has worked in a project in Europe as well as in Asia and North Africa. So in parallel to this activity, Diego has been involved as a guest teacher at the PUB Master in Urban Regional Planning, and as well as TU Delft and ULB. In 2016, Diego co-founded Carqui Cultural Projects, which I think he can tell us a bit more. So yeah, the floor is yours, Diego. Welcome.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the invitation to ACAN Finland, to Sophie, Raul, and Francesco. I will share my screen. Please give me a sign if when everything's fine.
Yeah, we can see it fine and hear you fine.
All right, perfect. So yes, thank you very much. So I will talk, well, the title of my presentation is Periphery Everywhere, some intensification strategies in the Belgian territory. So what I would do basically in this presentation is to have a quick overview of the context of the Belgian territory, how it came to be as it is today, which are the challenges we're facing today. And then I'm also going to illustrate some strategies that we have trying to implement for a long time already through 3 different projects. Well, the lecture of today, or the theme, is about how small scale influence big scale and vice versa. So I will really talk about a very big scale. So most of the projects are really on the territorial scale, and it's pretty much linked to policies and public authorities, which are mainly the ones who commission these studies. So it's pretty much more like a methodology studies on a very big scale. But first, I want to say some few words about the office I work in. So I've been working in BUUR for 10 years already, since I came to Belgium. BUUR is an urbanism office that just recently joined forces with the Sweco Belgium group, and we all together with the Urban Habitat branch of Sweco Belgium and with BUUR, we are BUUR part of Sweco. And within the wide range of projects we do, there are master planning, feasibility studies, spatial economy plans. We give strategic advice. We do also public space design and also implementation. We have landscape visions, mobility plans. So many ranges of projects dealing with the urban scale. And we try to bundle the knowledge that we get from these projects into what we call our 10 transitional programs. So these are thematic ways in which we try to deal with the complexity of the projects we work, but also to learn from them in order to really have and reinforce or content-wise the impact that we could get within the transition we are facing towards a more sustainable living environment. So, well, some of the programs are climate and energy, strong centers, healthy environments, integrated ecosystems, circular economy, sustainable mobility, technology for people, regional development, from which I will speak a bit more in detail later on, inclusive society, and infrastructure as spatial leverage. In parallel, as Francesco was saying, I also co-founded CACRI Cultural Projects. So it's a small non-profit association that we deal with the implementation of cultural projects on really bottom-up approaches and self-initiated ventures. And the main goal of CACRI is to valorize the street and the public space as a cultural stage. So we have done some projects. It's really a side job. So we don't have an extensive amount of work, but we have done very, very nice collaborations in the last 6 years. So as I said before, I will start talking a little bit about the context. So the focus would be Flanders, but Flanders and Belgium are of course overlapping. So I will talk about Belgium as well a little bit. As you can see in this slide, so Belgium is a rather small country. It's located in the center of Europe. But as you see from the two pictures, it's quite densely urbanized. Well, it's a very strong stain of urbanization that you could see. And this is, of course, a very specific phenomenon. But it's not only a phenomenon. Maybe if here it's quite extreme, it's not an isolated phenomenon. This is happening everywhere. This is how Belgium is composed. So this slide is an important slide because I will talk about the different political administration bodies of the country, because they are also our clients. So it's important when I show the projects I will show before to understand who is commissioning this and which are the limits that sometimes these regional or provincial entities they have in the implementation of projects. So basically Belgium is composed it's a federal country. So it is composed by 3 autonomous regions, which means that each region has certain autonomy. So there are certain laws which are applied on each region differently or independently from the other. The 3 regions are Flanders in the north, which is the Dutch-speaking part. Then you have Wallonia in the south, which is French-speaking, and a little bit of it is also German-speaking on the east part, sorry. And then you have Brussels, which is the Brussels capital region. So Brussels is not only a city or the capital of Belgium, but it's also a region in itself. So these 3 autonomous regions, they are normally divided also in provinces, and the provinces are divided in municipalities. In the case of Brussels, it's so small, so it's not divided in provinces. It would be too much already. So there is 19 municipalities in Brussels. So Flanders, as you see, quite a sprawled, densely urbanized territory. It's the house of around 6.5 million inhabitants. So you can imagine it's the size of a large metropolis. It's just that it's not concentric or compact, as it could be Paris or even London. It is more sprawled, multi-centered, we could say, with many poles and many different landscapes. But it can be considered a metropolis in itself. It's just a diffuse metropolis in which you can have your daily life happening in different places all over Flanders and go back home at night as everybody else do. So how this came to be, it's really rooted in history. So this territory has been always an in-between territory in Europe. So many occupations, many governments, many rulers have been overlapping throughout history. And by the medieval times, most of the territory was composed by cities, so city-states, with their own economy, with their own politics, their own rulers, but also with their walls, and where they had to be quite introvert in order to either fight with other cities or compete or to negotiate with other cities. So this was giving already this kind of urbanized, sprawled character to the territory from very, very far away. But of course, this was put into extremes when the industrialization happened. So basically the Flemish cities, they become industrial cities. in the beginning of the last century, in the industrial times. So they became the economic power of the country, the concentration of employment, also of production. In that sense, the quality actually of the city, of the urban tissue itself, started to degrade. So there were quite poor living conditions in cities. So as a way to deal with that, and also through the spirit of the time, there was a trend to house the workers in rural villages, or the creation of the garden cities. There are many garden cities in Flanders already from the 30s, in which they wanted to give this quality of life to workers by approaching them to this rural kind of ideal situation where you're close to open spaces, to nature with low density, with a community feeling, etc. And this was of course reinforced by the extensive network of railways all around the country. Because industrialization happened, also Belgium was one of the first and mostly densely countries in Europe having railways, this very dense railway network all over, covering the entire country. So of course this facilitated this suburbanization, I would say. When the war came and a lot of destruction came in the cities, there was of course the need also of reconstruction, and also to deal with the demographic growth after the post-war period. So the strategy at the time, of course, we have to think that in this post-war period, the values we had at the time were really about more individual development. There was cars being the driver for development of the territory, and there were new standards of living and new ambitions as well. So one of the strategies was from the government was to give subsidies to people to build their own house in the countryside. So this became a sort of a lifestyle and a culture, and even a goal within people's lifespan. It was to build their own house. Is something that is still today quite prominent in society. So one of the few steps you need to do in life is to build your own house, let's say. And to have this ideal house of 4 facades and a garden in a quite quiet and quite qualitative living environment. This was also reinforced by the public investment on more top-down projects, so collective housing. So social housing were starting to be built also in the villages and in the rural areas, following also the principle of Siam and the modernist architecture. So big blocks spread a little around open spaces. And of course, this was reinforced by the investment on road infrastructure to make it all these places with now big density accessible for everybody. I think this is not new. I think many countries have gone through this phenomenon. The only thing is that Belgium is still quite small and with a lot of population. So of course, when you give this kind of framework of urbanization, there is then the organic growth that comes after that. So these houses with 4 facades started to densify, to be extended towards the garden, to consume a bit more land. Families were growing, and the needs of the house were also changing. So there was this organic suburbanization that came afterwards, and also this suburban cultural lifestyle that as opposition, you were getting also an anti-urban attitude. So cities were abandoned, were not really taken care of. People were moving to the countryside, and the cities were being just left for the least affluent classes to populate them, also with not enough resources to have a quality public spaces, infrastructure, etc. And well, this of course reinforces this sort of rural nostalgia in which people were putting their goals and their ambitions to have this kind of lifestyle. This was of course also reinforced by policy plans. So the land use plans of the 70s, they were reinforcing and facilitating this peripherization. What you see in this plan is on red is the areas which is allowed to build a house, and what you see on the stripes on the hatch, red hatch, is the reserved land that is supposed to be activated in the future when the population grow even further. So you see that there is within this vision of the land use plan of the 70s, a lot of densification on agricultural areas, but also on green zones. So of course, when you all have these conditions and you all have these ambitions in mind, at the end, the dream of living in the rural areas is not quite, because you need to share the same kind of ambitions with 2 other million people. So the qualities or the character or the expectations you could get from the rural areas are not the reality. So you get fragmentation of rural land and reduction, of course, on inequality and in surface. And then you get also degradation, urbanization, and reduction of natural areas. So this whole ambition of living in the open space is actually being threatened by the process of urbanization, which is quite logic. So this creates, of course, a sort of homogenization of the whole territory, in which villages started to become more like a peripheral or suburbs rather than the village in itself, losing identity, losing quality, and losing heritage. Where you're getting, instead of public spaces, is mainly a lot of traffic infrastructure and spaces for cars, with facilities and services also based on the car mobility and not on pedestrians anymore. You get the peripherization of services, so suburban malls and where there were concentrates shops and all the services you need in your daily life, so you can get to it by car, which creates a lot of pressure on the villages and the cores, where all the shops being under a strong competition from these other developments. You get also, of course, traffic congestion, you get social segregation, and you get an increasing environmental risk. This is something that is not new, but it's becoming often and more often. These are images from this year's flooding in West Germany and in Belgium, the south part of Belgium. What you see on the right is a map of the red alert or high alert areas in the Wallonian region. So it's mostly the whole region was on red alert. Entire villages and cities were had to be emptied. A lot of people lost not only their life but also their homes, and their villages were heavily damaged. This has been really a turning point in many things, so we can expect a lot of things accelerating in terms of urban policies, thanks to these events happening this summer. It's not only about floods, it's also about air pollution and other kind of environmental risk. You see the quite dark stain all over Belgium in the map. And of course, this is an ongoing process, so it has been growing like that since the 70s, and if we keep on doing the same in the next 30 years, we will have the image here on the bottom right of an almost entirely urbanized, continuous urbanization all over the territory. So of course, this is not new for anybody. All these patterns, they of course pose a lot of challenges and threats, which are not unique for Belgium. There are global threats about climate change, ecosystems under pressure, social segregation, economic development, health, management of resources, agriculture under pressure, accessibility, etc. And then, of course, everything we do in terms of spatial planning has to go into this direction. We need to face these challenges in every scale we work on, in every project we do. So the first project I will explain is a spatial vision for the Flemish Brabant province. So this is a quite particular project because it is a theoretical research we did on the territory of the province of Vlaams Brabant. So it's what you see actually in this red square. It is a big part of Flanders, but it's not entirely Flanders. It's a very dynamic territory around Brussels. So what you see here in dark is Brussels. Brussels is not part of the province, but Brussels is somehow floating within this province. which give, of course, a lot of conditions, a lot of opportunities as well, but also a lot of pressure on this territory around it. We're talking about 65 municipalities and around 1 million inhabitants of this province. So it is interesting, I go back to this map of the regions that I was explaining before. It is interesting to understand actually which is the role of a province within this kind of projects or a special planning, because the province is not a region, but it's not a municipality either. It's somewhere in between. And sometimes when you get into implementation or even promotion of urban projects, they happen either on the regional scale where there is budget and resources for that, or they happen either on the municipal scale where you can approve permits and where you also have budget, and when you have also taxes, so tax money to invest on urban projects. The province doesn't have any of this, but it has this role of being sort of in between these two scales. So in this case, the province of the Vlaams Brabant, they wanted to try to respond to the challenges I mentioned before by giving a spatial plan that would not talk about specific projects, because it's also delicate to point out specific projects and specific places, but to give the basic principles, strategies, and themes in which the two levels, the regional level and the local level, should somehow find a common ground. So the coherence of spatial planning was one big part of the mission for this study, but also use the study to create partnerships on different levels and use it as a sort of collaboration platform. It is very important, and this will come back in other projects, is the dialogue that we can have between different actors, because all the projects we do on a big scale, they are not carried on by only one actor. They have to be really a collective effort. That is a challenge in itself, and we need to innovate also in that direction. So we had to actually make an abstract plan for the province, very theoretical, as I said. And in order to do that, we had also to understand which are the conditions of the territory, to analyze it, and then to be able to propose solutions. Here, what you see are 3 samples of 3 different tissues within the province. On the upper squares, you see a very old map from the 16th century, which was showing as a very, I think the first coherent plan for the whole Belgium, in which everything was mapped, was done by Ferraris, is called the author, and is mapping mainly the agrarian infrastructure or structure that was guiding the urbanization. Here we see in the different villages how the pattern of urbanization was following either the natural conditions or the agricultural possibilities that you could get on each territory, giving it a specific shape, very much rooted in the form and the conditions given by the land. And then on the lower schemes, you see how the patterns are today, and the influence that the main infrastructural lines over the territory had on these patterns. So where you have new roads of railway or roads for cars, you see that this is also guided urbanization, either by creating these sort of linear structures that you could see also here very clearly, but also by creating new types of tissues, what we call allotment plans, which don't have anything to do with the territory anymore. They are they have their own logic, which is being connected to a car infrastructure, and they are totally detached from the logics and the possibilities of the land. So this kind of sort of contradiction or opposition between what is the location of a place based on the physical location and what is the location of a city or of a settlement by means only of the accessibility of infrastructure, which doesn't really take care much on the natural elements of a place. So based on that, we wanted to make a sort of matrix or a methodology in order to analyze the territory. So we have on this scheme We have on the two sides the main drivers for the dynamization of the territory. We have the physical structure and we have the mobility infrastructure, and they both give conditions for the other type of patterns that we have to happen. So we have the cities which are conditioned by this both. We have the economic tissues, which sometimes they are also floating in the territory. We have the villages, we have the open space, and we have the periphery. So in order to illustrate and to try to find alternatives or even strategies for this, we made this abstract sample of the territory in which we put all these elements together. So this is not representing any particular place, it's representing all the place together. We try to locate all these different patterns, especially as normally they are within the territory. We have open spaces, we have mobility infrastructure, which is very determined. We have some natural places. We have villages with their own historic composition. We have random economic tissues a bit floating everywhere. We have enormous areas of peripheral structures, and then we have the cities which have a center which is normally compact and old. There's probably everywhere an ancient wall. You have the inner part of the city, and then you have also the outer part of the city, the 20th century part of the city, which is also quite fragmented and dispersed. So we, in order to try to come to a sort of generic strategy, we try to, on one hand, divide this exercise into different themes: mobility, housing, services, economy, open space, and energy. But also to try to think about already certain strategies or certain ambitions that we would like to go, or certain values, I would say. So not to keep it only analytical, but also with already a certain intention. So the idea of configuring high dynamic corridors, robust structures, productive landscape, network of lively cores, international poles, and places for energy. I'll go quickly over all these themes with some illustrations about it. So in terms of mobility, we had some ambitions on mobility, of course. The idea of improving the quality of living space, of living environment by reducing traffic pressure, to secure the multimodal accessibility of the province, to improve the health by reducing fine dust, noise pollution, but also to choose more active modes. Active modes is cycling and walking, and to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we had some strategies for this. On one hand, very basic, and this maybe is not rocket science. I think we all agree on much of this, but it's important to put them all together because this will actually create the basis for further discussions afterwards. So in one hand, to create less trips and less travel by having a smart location policy. That is quite logical. Also to include infrastructure for cyclists and pedestrians. We can find in many places in the periphery areas where you don't have sidewalks or nothing to walk, it's only for cars. And it's important to consider, of course, the infrastructure for cyclists and pedestrians, not only in the city, but also outside the cities. The performing public transport to connect different places, but also to connect with each other by having multimodal poles. This could happen in dense environments already, but also in the core of the villages, we can propose or instigate more for traffic-free centers in which the ancient tissues of the villages, probably the square around the church and the most oldest blocks, they could be car-free by organizing the traffic and the parkings around it and creating a much better and much qualitative place for pedestrians and cyclists. The optimization of the road network. So we have too many roads. Sometimes they're all paved in the same way. They're all in the same hierarchy, but actually they can be optimized by hierarchizing certain roads over the others and creating a more efficient road infrastructure. In that sense, also multimodality becomes important, not only in the cities where you have, of course, buses and trams and all these kind of things, but also in the villages where eventually public transport can be combined with other networks like a bicycle network, always trying to create these nodes where you can choose your mode and where you eventually can bring also other opportunities around it. But to those places, like this kind of small fragments, which are quite isolated, to give space also for alternative ways of mobility. So you have you have on-demand shuttles that could be arranged with technology. There is a way to deal with not very intense public transport, but on-demand public transport for the people who's living on these areas, and on a certain time they need some infrastructure. These are solutions that exist. They just need to be implemented in certain areas and believe that they exist. And in terms of economy or economical tissues, multimodality is also important. So it's not only the fact of being accessible for trucks via a highway or a road, but also to be accessible by many other means of transport, not only for goods. It's important that it is for goods, so we can use canals, railways and roads, but also for people, because these places, there are sources of employment. So people, they also have to get there. So this multimodality is also very important in terms of production and economy. This is then a sort of summary of all these strategies put in within this sample I showed before. And when we scaled up this kind of strategies, we could get eventually into a consistent and coherent network on a provincial scale that will make all this territory function in the most efficient way. In terms of housing, there are also some ambitions. So on one hand is the need for a change in the trend and the lifestyle ambitions, to look for the most appropriate residential locations, not organically as it happens today, but really with a planning perspective, to understand about the possibilities of putting different housing types, not only in terms of typology, but also in terms of affordability and quality, to have a housing program. Today it also happens randomly. It should happen in a coherence in the whole territory. To think about the reinforcement of residential areas, and to forecast demographic growth in a realistic way. So in that case, also the different patterns, they have different conditions for this. On one hand, the demographic growth in cities. On the other hand, the stronger growth in well-equipped cores. So you have certain villages which, even if they are not cities, they are still well-equipped. They are accessible and they have services. So these places, they can still hold some growth and densification. To concentrate certain possibilities on very, very punctual places, in the places which are not so well connected, because by doing that you reinforce an extra quality. Otherwise, it's not maybe a best idea. And of course, it has to be coupled with an improvement of the quality of the place in public space, landscape, and also in services. So there is, of course, the idea of having a selective densification and a renewal of existing places. So it's not about only new buildings, of course not. It's also about the renovation of what is existing. We have already too much. So it's more about the qualitative reinforcement of where the place is really allows it, and then eventually discourage the long-term existence of other certain typologies of housing which are not within these conditions. And of course, the combat of the fragmentation of open spaces. So instead of building in the parcels, which are, even if they're buildable zones that they are in the landscape, just try to only build where already there is a certain urbanization and try to free up the other parcels somehow. This is an overview of the different strategies in terms of housing. And if we scaled up as well, we could be able to classify the different settlements according to the conditions they have for urbanization, having the places which are more accessible, the best conditions to have even a denser urban typology, and then the other places which are more remote to encourage other qualities that they could have, for instance, the proximity of the landscape, and not necessarily the growth or the densification. In terms of facilities, the proximity and accessibility is important. Also to have sufficiently large user potential for facilities. So the facilities that exist, they need to be used, and they need to have enough critical mass of people using it so they can be feasible economically as well. And optimization of the existing facilities. When we see in cities the importance of clustering facilities, they help to have a diversification of uses, quite reachable in a certain place, and also to have enough critical mass of people going into a specific place, so it helps to organize the territory. When we have a smaller fragments, then the fact of being close to a public transport, it provides the conditions of accessibility to have a facility, to have a service like a school or a library that can serve not only that specific village in this case, but villages which are also close by public transport. That's the case when you have a smaller villages. The idea is then to have the opportunity to share facilities among villages. If we have a good mobility, as I was mentioning before, it is possible that you can have a pool, a swimming pool in one village, and then a library in another village, and then a cultural center in another village, and then you use them. And instead of having one pool and one library and one school in every fragment, because it's not feasible in terms of public investment. In that sense, also the economic areas, they can become part of this network of services by also providing what is needed to the local communities, and not necessarily being only a suburban car-oriented retail places. And of course, to create accessibility to open space facilities. Again, an overview of all this. And then if we scale up, we're able to identify the different potentials of the different settlements to host different types of facilities that can be mutualized among the whole territory. You will have the bigger cities where they will concentrate every type of facility, but also they will concentrate those facilities that are of a regional scale, like for example, universities, hospitals, cultural centers, these kind of places. But then on the smaller villages, you will have other facilities which are they are used on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, to be shared among the others and close by.
Diego, sorry to interrupt us. Just
Yes.
to say that you have 10 more minutes. We started a bit later, but then the next guest will present his work. So 10 more minutes. We can have some questions and answer after.
Okay, I'll try to speed up then. This is about the economic structure, so also some strategies on it. And then how the economic landscape the economic configuration of the territory could be organized. In terms of open space, there are also some strategies. Therefore, an open space strategy would come. And then in terms of energy, we can also have certain strategies according to the different patterns we have. Having, of course, the potential of having an energy landscape as a consistent and coherent infrastructure. This is an overview, which is, of course, still very abstract. But the idea is that this provincial level, they could give also some conditions to other projects, either on a regional or local level, to happen. I will try to be quick, as you have two other projects. I will go through it very fast, maybe skipping some slides. I apologize for this. On the mobility, I wanted to present you a project. We are still working on it in terms of mobility. Is the Regionet Oost-Brabant. So it's a research project that is becoming a real project of a mobility network on a regional level in one part of is the province, is the region around the city of Leuven. Here's just to show you the spread of population within the territory. You see that a third of the whole population is actually living outside cities or villages. They are living really on the sprawl, on the periphery. This, of course, puts a lot of mobility threats and pressure. And of course, when you reinforce this activity, you are actually creating extra peripherization. So the peripherization creates a car increasing use, which create displacing alternatives, which at the same time increase the car dependency. So in that sense, it's very difficult to organize when everything has different destinations. When you see the flow of different modes, here on the bar, you see the distance in kilometers, and here the percentage of the trips being done. You see that between 0 and 10 kilometers, there are quite certain multimodality, at least for 30% of the displacement. But between 10 and 40, there is almost none. And then again, when you are on a distance of 40 to 70 kilometers, the train starts to become an interesting alternative, which means that there is a gap between 10 and 40 kilometers in which the car is the only way in which you can move. And that's a big problem on a territory such as Belgium, which is that small. That's why we're using a lot of cars. When you see the room that is still available for new construction, the red, not the light red, the dark red, is empty areas that can still be built. So this also will reinforce this condition. The goal is then to shift modes, to diminish 20% of the car, to increase by 2.5 times the public transport and by 2 times the bicycle network. That happens by working on different, to make it more efficient, the existing networks that exist, and also to try to use transport as a way of organizing the territory, as I explained before. So these are a sequence of maps in which we show the different networks that we're pushing to be implemented. On one hand is the increased frequency of the existing railway network. On the other hand is the implementation on different roads, so existing car roads, the implementation of a trambus or a tram, which will be then this in-between mean between the train and the bus, that we will be able to have in an efficient way service on a D scale of 20 to 50 kilometers. This can be complemented by another network connecting the little villages to these corridors, high intensity corridors, which could be then complemented by very small networks on demand, eventually a smart public transport that will give you to the main access places. And this, of course, in complement to a very efficient network of bicycle network. So if we think about this transport-oriented development, actually with the buildable zones we have only around the different stops, is enough to meet the needs of growth and population in the whole province. So we don't need all these red things that I was showing you before. With only the red stains that you could see in this map is more than enough actually for the whole population, which means that we should discourage these other places to be built. And how do you do it in practice is very difficult, but the logic is to have this transferable developable rights, which means the people who still have the right to build in these kind of areas, they should, or they can be allowed to use those rights to build on a more well-served area, so increasing the density, and at the same time decreasing the opportunities or the possibilities to grow in this way. This is a very complex process because it's really an operational process, but it's the only way in which this can be balanced. In that sense, all the villages that are disconnected from this network, they can also be implemented or they can reframe their development more into the qualities of being in the open space and all the possibilities that this could bring. and then we will have this kind of vision for the whole territory. This, of course, will create a sort of an urban structure which is linear, where you concentrate not only the new densification or the growth, but where you also concentrate the different services. So in that sense, you can, as I was saying before, you can share services which are connected within this highly connected corridor. This will be somehow the logic. You have a tram stop, certain areas, they have other possibilities, and then you will bring some extra possibilities of densification, creating other kind of urbanity and mixity in terms of typologies. This also has an impact on big cities. So Leuven is an important city in Flanders. It's a knowledge center. We have a university here. It's very important in terms of innovation and knowledge economy. Today, it functions really around the hub of the train stop, while with this kind of strategy, it can become a more multi-centered or networked place, which will give to the southern part of the city a different kind of possibilities to growth and to make more efficient use of the open space and the services that exist. And also this gives condition for the improvement, incremental improvement of public space. It is interesting to think about who is behind this and how the process comes. You have, this was a research project that started as an initiative from the university together with our office, that slowly became into a think tank involving other governmental agency. And the goal is that by next coming years, the role or initial role will stop, and there will be a structural collaboration among all these other regional actors in order to make this happen. This is already happening in other projects. So this is a village which is part of this network, in which we did another project. This is a new tram stop, and this gives possibilities for this area to hold on some densification, but also to dynamize in terms of use and optimization of resources. Also the industrial area that is on the north and the open spaces that are on the north as well. In terms of other smaller projects we have done within the same type, this is an office cluster in the periphery of Brussels, which normally is a monofunctional place, only offices, but because the fact that we have a train station and the coming new tram stop coming from this network I was showing you before, the conditions for this place, they are shifting for being suburban to being more urban and to become a sort of multimodal place in which other functions and other kind of density can be incorporated by creating this kind of more urban structure. This is the last project. It's also very interesting. I hope I will have time to explain it further.
You have time if you hurry up.
I will hurry up. So this is a very interesting project. It's an ongoing project. It's not finished yet. It's a network of open spaces in and around Brussels. Here we are in Brussels, finally, where the square is. It was a mission made together with Buur, Antea Group, and Hesselter. And it was commissioned by different regional entities. What is very important and very interesting already is that this project came to happen. That's already a big step, because it's the product of the collaboration between the two regions, the Brussels region and the Flemish region. So all these logos are different regional agencies that they came together, they put resources all together in order to finance this vision. Because it's not a vision which is only about Brussels. It's really the interface between the metropolis of Brussels and then the sprawl of the Flemish territory. Because of course, nature and open spaces, they are not constrained by political borders. So here you see a sample of what is this territory. It is really an heterogeneous territory with a lot of different typologies of places, of functions, of urban environments, but also with a quite a big diversity of open spaces, from very low quality to very high quality places with different values and different opportunities. And then the mission, what's the mission? Why we're doing this? So it's actually to put back the focus on the open space. And we have been building cities and roads and infrastructure for the last 100 years almost, and with too less attention for open space. We have built too much already, and now the focus has to come to the open space, because it's through the open space in which we can actually address a lot of the big threats we have in terms of climate adaptive measures, in terms of health, in terms of social value, in terms of many things. These are some figures about alarming figures about threats that we currently have in Brussels that can be solved through a coherent plan of open spaces. Which means that the open spaces is not only a landscape, it's not only a place for nature, and it's not only a place to enjoy, it's actually an infrastructure, and it's an infrastructure that has a certain performance to bring. It is a service. Look, what the ecosystems bring to people and to the planet are services. They are able to provide places for water, places for biodiversity. They have the quality of soil, which provide us with food. So it is not really a passive element. It's really an active infrastructure that has to be understood in that way. So our first or methodology for working on this vision was first to really do extensive analysis of what is open space. We did it through directions. On one hand, we did a very extensive research on all the projects and initiatives happening in Brussels in terms of juridical plans, projects, and policies regarding open spaces. It was quite a lot of work. And on the same time, we did with our partners, we did some very technical analysis on different levels of the layers of the open space, from soil to industry, to the fertility of the land, to the water management, etc. And with all these components, we tried to make a vision, which was at the same time a top-down vision, but also a bottom-up vision in which we consulted different stakeholders, etc. This is a summary of this approach. By analyzing these technical elements, we were able to identify which are the cooling corridors, for example, which are the places which really become an infrastructure for the whole metropolis, and how these places or the importance of these places to be maintained and reinforced as open structures. This led to a regional vision in which we make the overlap between landscape structures in the sense of natural corridors, but also the different human networks that will activate and dynamize these landscape infrastructures. We did then a zoom on the northern part of Brussels, and we really mapped all the different open spaces, not only the existing, but also the potential open spaces. This is, for instance, one corridor, which, as you can see, is not really an homogeneous structure either. It is really fragmented, but it can be continuous anyways. It doesn't need to be homogeneous to be continuous, and it's this diversity that will give the richness of this continuity. On this process, then we selected some case studies to go more in depth. I will talk about this area, which is a case of Wolvebelt. Here is an old picture, but here you could see it was the NATO headquarters being built at the time, and these are the former NATO headquarters, which are now being opened for development, with some other fragments of industrial places, of office places, of urban residential tissue, but also of agricultural places. These are some cemeteries, of course, some infrastructure around it. The idea was, by doing research by design, to see how can we design these places from a large perspective. On one hand, to the importance of being open to the landscape. Today, the people or these actors, they are giving the back to the landscape. For us, it was important that they can give the front to the landscape, because this will give conditions for all this tissue to organize, but also they will bring some important, they will bring some attention on some important places where you could develop these doors towards the landscape, and eventually you can have some interesting things happening, either services or density. Then we have different types of big landscape structures that could have a metropolitan relevance, like sort of metropolitan parks, that they don't have to be fragmented. Even though these parks, they could have different identity, they can also have a coherent ecological structure that makes them work together. And all this together, they can also give conditions of how the mobility is organized by keeping the cars outside of this landscape and promoting more the soft network of connections within this landscape. We have then, therefore, a sort of a coherent vision, still a very top-down exercise, research by design, from which we identified different situations that could be then extrapolated in the whole region. We did a series of workshops, and within these workshops, we also were able to identify with local residents and authorities, users, very concrete project opportunities that could happen within this vision. And we try to classify these opportunities thematically in a way that we can also make a sort of a fish per opportunity of project in order to have already a palette of concrete actions to make on this landscape. This is very important because it's by doing this exercise that we could actually identify the different actors that could have an influence on these projects, from the local scale, the micro scale, to the very large scale, involving from citizens and active neighbors to really regional agencies on a big scale. And this is the only way. So actually, this is the outcome of what we need to do, is to find the partnerships that can make this vision happen. And for this, I will end up very soon. What we are putting now into place, so it's the next phase of the project, is by, once we did all this research on visioning, on stakeholder mappings, and on research by design, we identified opportunities, but it's not up to us actually to make these opportunities happen. And it's not even up to the region, which are our client, the two regions, which are our clients, to implement this project. Actually, all these projects, if we want to make community gardens, if we want to make a park, if we want to make some intensive agriculture, they should come from the people who are going to really implement. So it means municipal level, it means neighbors associations, it means private owners, even households. So what we are putting in place as a next phase of the project is what we call support center platform, which actually we bundle our expertise within this platform, that we could give support to all the initiatives that comes bottom up in terms of project level. So we can do projects for them. We can support in dialogues to having some stakeholder mapping, or even some possibilities to organize synergies, but also to give technical support when needed. So this is a phase that will start, I think, next year, and it's on demand. When somebody has a project, they can come easily to us in order to go into the next phase of implementation. I finish up with this slide. It is just a personal thought. By working really a lot on these two extremes, so I talked today about these very large projects that have been involved, very top-down projects, but I also work on a very local bottom-up projects, and I can always see that these very top-down, they are already quite formal. They already have formal tools and mechanisms. You have visions, you have master plans, you have policy plans. They have their own form and they are very concrete. And then you have the local initiatives that sometimes they pop up in a very scarce circumstances with not enough of resources. Sometimes they don't get enough attention to become structural or relevance. They are sometimes very precarious. And even though there are very successful examples, there is the majority of these projects, they failed actually to scale up. And this is actually what we need to really think and focus. It is on this in-between scale of implementation, which doesn't have a clear form now. We don't have a clear format to work on it. We don't have a clear formula or a clear plan. It is always innovation. It is always experimentation, and it is always a recurrent system of making precedents to create good examples and pioneering projects. And this is a fertile ground. This is something that is still not very developed. And we need to be able to find enough resources to work on this in between scale. I think the next presentation will maybe give us some very good examples of what could happen on that scale. Thank you very much, and sorry if I took too long. I hope it was interesting, and please, if you have questions, I'm very happy to answer them.
Thank you, Diego, indeed.
Yeah, thank you so much, Diego. It was super interesting. If I quickly jump in and then I hand over to Francesco and any of the audience, because I was born in Leuven and lived there until I was 21 and then escaped to London. So it's very interesting seeing sort of almost not the outside view, but in a way the professional view of having experience of living there, not having studied it as such. And I think Francesco will pick up on some of those questions. How do you enable that change? But what stood out for me also is the political nature of it, that you cannot, like, we cannot have this green transition for what we need to do at this individual plot scale, particularly in Belgium. You didn't really touch on it, but well, you touched a lot on the mobility issues, but it's sort of this issue that everybody then is now talking in Belgium, because all my family still live there, are talking about, you know, their eco home and, you know, the heat pumps that they use, warmtepompen, that I assume you speak Dutch or some Flemish, but you know that some, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that they all talk about sort of this like their own home, right? But then they need a car to get everywhere, and it's a fossil fueled car, and we need all that road infrastructure, and everybody's in their own home, a detached home, and that's very much, we have this saying that Vlamingen zijn met a brick. Basically, Flemish people are born with a brick in their stomach, met een baksteen. Vlamingen zijn met een baksteen in hun maag geboren, we say. Because everybody wants to build their own kind of home on their own plot. And so maybe I'll hand over to Francesco and some questions about how maybe that might happen in reality, and maybe also from people in the audience as well. But it's super interesting. And I definitely want to, when I'm next time in Belgium, I haven't traveled with COVID now, it's 2 years. I'd definitely like to go for a coffee with you and hear more about some of these other aspects of your work as well. So thank you.
With pleasure.
Yes, well, actually, I have a question or two, but maybe we could start with Friend London presentation, if okay for Raul, if everything is okay. And then we can also collect some questions in the chat for people attending live. You can type your question, or of course you can put your mic on at the end and have a question to both Diego and Fred. So maybe we could. Do
you want to do the questions at the end together? You mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe if Fred is waiting to get in, then we can collect everything and have a conversation at the end to wrap up. What do you think?
Okay. Unless, can we maybe quickly check unless there's anything pressing and people might not stay for the whole duration, and we flip the speakers around, which might has messed things up a little. Then maybe unmute now if there's any immediate questions for Diego, because also Diego, are you able to stay for the full session?
Yes, I'm able.
Yeah, because you'd originally planned to be second anyway.
Yeah. And I'm also curious about the next presentation. So.
Yeah. Okay. Great. But if there is no immediate questions, I think Francesco's idea is very, very good. Let's hold for 30 seconds. Anything in the chat otherwise, or unmute and ask the questions from the audience now. Seems nothing is coming in. Okay, so I think that means that we can group the discussion at the end and we don't run over too much. The plan is that we would finish around 6 o'clock Finnish time. which is basically 4 o'clock UK time and 5 o'clock Central European time. Is that right, isn't it? Yeah, I'm getting that right. Okay. Well, then I think maybe let's just check in whether Fred can hear us okay, and then I'll introduce Fred briefly. Are you there, Fred?
Yes, I can hear you. I think you can hear me, can you?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly fine. We can't see you, but I think you're dialing in on your phone. Is that correct?
No, I'm on my laptop. I just
okay.
I wasn't sure which way to make me turn into my face rather than just my initials.
Okay.
Is it hide non-video or hide self-view?
It says exactly, if you click on the left-hand side button, left-hand side, you've got mute button and then stop video or start video. I just tried it. What it says.
Start video.
Does that work? Yes, there you are. Hello.
Right. Yes, that's me.
Hi.
Yes, hello. Yeah, it is great to see you again.
Yeah, I'll briefly introduce you now because Fred London is dialing in, zooming in from London, actually. And he studied at Cambridge University and at Harvard University as an architect. And he also spent some time in Vienna. And following that, he joined Pollard Thomas Edwards, where his primary focus was on social housing, later shifting his emphasis to community architecture when he joined Hunt Thompson Associates, known at the time as HTA. And in 1995, Fred became a founder director, now partner of John Thompson and Partners JTP, where he worked on numerous housing projects for developers as well as the London Wetland Centre. The scale of these projects have increased from the level of community architecture to that of community planning in the UK and Europe. And actually, Fred has also undertaken some work in Finland, in Tampere specifically as well. And he's also done some other international collaborations on master plans for settlements in Russia and China. And the breadth of his cross-cultural experience has contributed to a unique perspective on what makes for universally applicable healthy placemaking. You've also just published a book, and I think quite a few bits that you will talk about are actually in your fairly new year-old publication. For those of you that are students at Tampere University, we have it as an ebook. And can you remind me, Fred, of what the title is of your book? Because I'm now not actually have got it on my screen.
Well, it's Healthy Placemaking, and the subheading is Wellbeing Through Urban Design.
Yeah. And that's why we invited you here. And Fred also was actually in person giving a talk at the Architecture and Cities in Transition seminar for SAFA on the 8th of October. So we've recently actually met, but this is actually a different talk he's giving to us today. So over to you, Fred. I think that Raul might be the one sharing the slides. Is that correct? So when he has to tell you the next slide, or when you need the next slide, just tell him next or indicate that you're ready for the next slide.
Well, let's see. Do I have to, all right, this is already happening. This looks encouraging, although it'd be good if it was larger.
Yeah, can you do full screen, Raul? Yeah. Normally it's on the, no, normally it's a PDF. It's in Spanish.
It's a PDF, it's a PDF.
Yeah, but it looks completely different from my screen. Does somebody know where you have full screen? Normally you can go to view and do full screen, but if you go to view button, the view tab, and you normally should have full screen there.
I have share screen. Is there any point in suggesting that?
Yeah, if you want to do it, you could share your own
Let's
screen.
see what happens.
Yeah.
Okay, that might be this one.
It's not doing something. Yes, we can see.
Yeah. And I think I can cope with that. It's got, so I am screen pairing. No, what was it? Screen sharing, actually.
Yeah.
And it's just been, I don't know if there's any way for it to be made.
So we can see this now.
Yeah, that's right.
Can you click on the right-hand side little arrow as well to get rid of the export PDF, edit PDF tab as well? And
wait a minute, where are you? Sorry, where should I look?
There's a little in the middle, so you have export PDF, edit PDF. On the left, like, I don't know how to best explain this, but between your slide, you have a gray zone, and then you have also a little arrow, move the mouse up. Or is it F11, somebody says, press F11, I don't know what,
Well, I should press F11.
F11, function 11, I think it means. Function, F for
Mhm.
function, your function button. But if you're on a Mac,
Doesn't quite.
yeah, that's already better. But if you can also, can somebody else help me to explain this? But if you, I don't know how to say, there's a very tiny little triangle in black on the bar where you would scroll down. If you just click that and remove the export PDF, edit PDF, and so on, please. No, on the, move more to the left, Yes, a little, no.
All right, it's now that's moved to this side a little bit.
No.
Well, it's the only thing that's wrong from my point of view, although that
it's just
might
that
not...
okay, it would be nice to see it larger on our screens as well, because we actually can see the whole PDF stuff, also like Raoul had as well.
Could
I'm trying to explain to you which part to click.
Could it be in the view menu if you click the view tab?
Yeah, when you can do full screen there.
Well, I said that I'm useless at this stuff. So,
when you go,
which is the view? Which is the view menu?
View, top left.
Top left, view. You mean, right, view, right, that's giving me some
full screen mode. Thank you, Francesco. Normally we have people who use PowerPoint and I'm used to using that. I don't use PDFs. Yeah,
right, this is getting better and better. It's
there
just still got this
dialogue.
It's still got this dialogue thing that is blocking it out. How does one get rid of that thing? It's a black line, and then it says
I think
you
that
are
you have
screen
because
share.
you're sharing the screen, and that's unfortunately is there. As
long
as
you see everything the way I would expect to see it, but if it's a dialog box, you should be able to also move that elsewhere on your screen, or you can also.
Oh yeah. Well, or just it's always blocking something.
Can you move? You can normally go, but because we have a different view, you can normally actually just close it, but don't leave the call. Can somebody else check what it would be? It's the box that you're sharing, right? You should be able to click on that and it will say minimize normally there's a little arrow down and it says minimize the dialog box.
But indeed, we can see perfectly, no?
But Fred has his own dialog box in the way of his own slides when he now doing full screen, but I cannot fully say what it says because I'm not the one sharing, so I cannot advise properly what it looks like. But normally at your dialog box, there is a little option that you have, and you can actually say minimize or the dialog box. My apologies to the audience for these technical issues. We can't hear you now, Fred. You're on mute. Fred, you're on mute. Fred, you're on mute. Raoul, can you please ask Fred to unmute through the system?
Right, can you hear me again now?
We can hear you now.
What I'm going to do is, because of these dialog boxes which won't move, I can move it around so that I can say the things that I want to, and the rest of you can see it anyway. Is that right?
Yes, we see what we'd expect to see.
Can you see the whole lot? Can you see the whole of the first thing? Okay, I can work with this. It's all right. I have been working on it for quite a while. So right, off we go. And in case any of you didn't know, everything needs to change. And that seems to be what's already happening, actually. Anyway, so how does macro scale affect micro scale and vice versa? And as an introduction, we've got macro and micro. The global society is macro versus individuals, which is micro. And also the highest levels of government are macro, whereas the grassroots approach is micro. So those are the things that have already been suggested by this whole idea. And it's true that a lot of what I'm going to be saying just comes from the book, but it is different bits of the book than I had talked about previously on other occasions. So it says, if we as individuals and as part of a global society had already explored every option to remedy the problems we face, we would be in a much worse predicament. We'd be in trouble, yeah? But countless stones remain unturned, and only a fraction of them will need to be explored, understood, and acted upon to effect sweeping improvements. And we must sustain this approach by our will and determination to take it as a matter of the utmost importance from the grassroots to the highest levels of government. So that's the first point. It carries on to the right, and I can slide this thing around. So the next thing is, maybe this black thing's quite fun actually. Anyway, human nature and health is the next topic. The natural attractions of the easy life, and that's to do with life's choices. And this shows these 4 circles, the sensible, the fortunate, no choice, or your choice. And if you start with the sensible, you can see there are these images which show an angry blue face, but a sort of comfortable enough heart. And basically the point underneath says that one doesn't enjoy it, but it's healthy for you. And that's why it says understand the advantages of these things because of the health benefits. Fortunate is the best one in some way, because that shows a healthy face and a healthy heart. And that one, that's because it enjoys the things that are also healthy. And that's why it says fewer dilemmas for people, the decisions that they make. Go to the bottom left-hand corner, which says no choice, as I said, and that shows an angry face and a split up heart. And their attitude is they don't enjoy it and it isn't healthy. So it's really ruining their lives. And so that, you know, they're suffering from exploitation. So that's no good. And finally, the one that is sort of in some ways most sort of typical is your choice one. Shows a smiley face, but a split up heart. And that's why, and what it says is that people enjoy it, but it isn't healthy for them. And I think a lot of people are in that situation. But what I'm saying is they succumb to temptation. They give in to too much drink, too much food, lots of other things all the time. So time to move on. Oh, now I've got, I've done it. Right, so the next bit is the Nicholas Stern review from 2006. And he was talking all those years ago about the economics of climate change. And he's pointing out that it's a major challenge, but long-term action can achieve it at costs that are low in comparison to the risks of inaction. I think we kind of know that a lot of inaction has been taking place, but he's perfectly right. Humankind's rapid consumption of natural resources causes pollution that harms delicate global ecosystems. We have already established that air pollution is toxic to our bodies, but it is also a significant cause of climate change, putting food, air, and water supplies at risk and threatening our health and well-being. If we do not take action against it now, the effects both on our health and that of our environment will continue to worsen. And as my friend Dr. Howard Frumpkin said, humans can't be healthy on a planet that isn't healthy, which is another very good way of putting that situation. Right, and now the next one, health at the heart of planning. And there's a Venn diagram from the EcoCity project I was involved with some time ago. And you can see it says 4 headings, but 1 heart. And if you look at the 4 headings, they are urban structure, transport, energy and material flows, and socio-economic issues. So those are the 4 sort of practical things that are shown. But look right in the middle. What does it say right in the middle? It says minimize impairment of environment and human health, and maximize mental well-being and community feeling. So that's really just showing what is the most important things for our lives altogether. not fame, fortune, or anything like that, or even transport or urban structure. It's how to be in a comfortable environment, which is healthy as well. And next one now is about participatory planning, and that it's healthier than competitive planning. This is about how projects get made. And you can see it says healthy procurement leading to healthy participation. And you can see the green thing is the participatory one, and the red one is the competitive one. You can see the top one, the P plan finalized, total period of production is 10 to 20 weeks. The next one, stage 5C, the design often required, the design shows, the stage shows 6 to 13 weeks. The design often requires reworking to be deliverable. I think that's often the situation with competitions, is that people win it, but then it all needs to be changed quite a lot afterwards. Not always. Next green one, stage 5P, the master plan can either be developed by the existing team or divided into separate parcels for detailed architectural competitions, or shared out amongst development companies. So it shows lots of possibilities that one could use in order to get to the outcomes one would wish to have. And going back to C plan finalized, the total period to production of competitive master plan is 18 to 37 weeks. So that's much longer than the participatory approach. And that's why we have this heading, consultation is not the same as participation, because you often get situations where people give an idea that they believe they ought to have, and they don't want other people to change it. Whereas participation means both sides are allowed to discuss it in different ways to get better outcomes. Right, moving on from theory to practice and the 6 principles of healthy placemaking. What you can see is 3 scales of planning towards the top on the left-hand side, and at the bottom, 3 linking concepts. And the 3 scales of planning are urban planning, walkable communities, and neighborhood building blocks. And they themselves are slightly relevant in terms of the larger scale, the medium scale, and the smaller scale, and the benefits one gets by looking at those in different ways. And the linking concepts are movement networks, environmental integration, and community empowerment. And you can see the patterns that are there. So reading onto the text, the interweaving of the grid diagram produces a different block of color for each of the 9 intersections to reinforce the message that all of the 6 principles relate to one another. This emphasizes that the benefits each principle may deliver individually is secondary to the impact generated through the combined effect of them all. Connection and integration are fundamental to the ethos of healthy placemaking. And now we're moving into a series that is called key lessons. And these ones are a combined thing. They're not separated on the plan or on the drawing. So key lessons. Urban planning is the first one of these 6 principles. And these headings then say saving costs of health and technical infrastructure and reducing climate change impacts. Good governance by regional and city authorities must place healthy lifestyles as a top priority, avoiding the problems of urban sprawl, lengthy commuting, and traffic congestion, and improving citizens' well-being. The reduction in vehicle emissions will help to combat climate change. Next is the benefits of physical exercise in daily life to reduce lifestyle-related avoidable illnesses. To be well planned, settlements must be compact and consist of an integrated mix of uses, including residential densities high enough to make ridership of clean public transport networks viable and reliable, and for active travel to be the natural choice for mobility. And third one, social interaction that builds community and supports those with mental health difficulties. Important destinations, including social, cultural, employment, leisure, and retail facilities, must be conveniently located to create an efficient, functional, and economically robust city of short distances that reduces the trips made by car and encourages inclusive, vibrant neighborhoods. And these are described as dispersed and united uses. And the dispersed is the top one. I should mention what it says. If you look at the circuit of circles, education is at the top, culture and creativity, then it's spending money, earning money, home and family, and sport and recreation. So these low densities make public transport unviable and cause people to build their lives around cars. And even though I've put public realm in the middle, there's actually not as much reason for public realm because they're all spread around the place. And then, whereas the united uses are much better, they involve an integrated mixed-use public realm combining physical activity with community cohesion, healthier lifestyles, reduced congestion, better air quality, interesting places, good quality of life, and a healthy planet. Now on to the next key lesson, which is walkable communities and the health benefits of walkable communities. The combination of integrated green space, daily needs within walking distance, and a compact mixed-use urban structure provide the foundations for healthy neighborhoods. Reduced need to use vehicles makes the public realm safer and more interesting, encouraging social interaction and making it easy to get exercise in daily life. Access to public green space is beneficial for physical and mental health and moderates the impacts of rain, wind, and overheating. Next one, high quality public realm. People like to visit places that are interesting, stimulating, and catch the imagination with a mix of retail outlets, events, and many other attractions. Next is avoiding road accidents and respiratory illnesses. Limited parking space and low vehicle speeds lead to safer streets and cause fewer injuries, traumas, and fatalities. Air quality is improved when fossil fuel vehicles are banned in built-up areas. And lastly, take account of the climate and local culture. Climate and local culture are part of a place's identity, which are attractive for visitors and can be exploited in design decisions. And then this is Torino in Italy. It's just an example of a walkable community that's a very successful one. Torino is a fabulous place for any of you who may not have been there. It's gorgeous. Next one is neighborhood building blocks and individual and collective well-being. Neighborhood building blocks generate health benefits by establishing places where people with interests and enthusiasms can meet and exchange ideas. This should also encourage social diversity and inclusivity, which help to broaden people's networks and strengthen community cohesion. And addressing loneliness and isolation. Social cohesion and enthusiasm at a local level are important for everyone, and in particular for those in need of support due to age or mental frailty. Social interaction helps people make new contacts, learn new skills, develop hobbies, and enjoy leisure facilities. And then building confidence and a sense of community to minimize fear of crime and encourage sociability, to minimize fear of crime and encourage sociability, houses and flats must be well planned and streets and public spaces must feel friendly and safe. And this one's in California, Fruitvale. It's also an interesting place. This is now a neighborhood buildings block addition, which Sophie sort of requested in one way or another. And so I'll just go through that. It's also useful as this, because it's the third of those initial projects, you know, the planning projects as opposed to the environmental ones. So the social life of cities, in particular, the ordinary, the small scale and mundane aspects of urban life are commonly overlooked as a source of insight and inspiration for city planners and decision makers. And then there's some points made about poor living conditions and social isolation diminish the quality of our lives. Well-designed and well-managed buildings and public spaces generate a sense of security and ownership in local communities. And the combination of mixed uses and dwellings creates a local focus and reference point for adjacent neighborhoods. A nascent community's choice to settle in a particular location will have been determined by the topographic and climatic qualities that made it suitable as a place for them to build their lives. Settlements can have something of a Russian doll quality, smaller ones nested inside larger ones. Walkable communities, of which there may be many within a town or city, occupy central positions within the larger strategic scale of urban planning. By the same token, there can be several neighborhood building blocks within one walkable community. There's lots of choices about how these spaces are used. And the neighborhood building blocks take the scale of planning to the finer grain that, without embarking on analysis of architecture, touches on aspects of built form and the design of smaller urban spaces. Moving on to the next one, but I'm just having a sip of water. Might do another one in a minute. Anyway, next key lesson, movement networks. This one's always a good one. So this is the economic and health benefits of discouraging vehicle parking. Limiting valuable urban space allocated to car parking frees it up for other uses, enabling the public realm to be more compact, stimulating, sociable, safe, and economically successful. Private vehicle traffic using the streets to access parking causes air pollution, including PM 2.5 and CO2 emissions, which between them contribute to respiratory illnesses and climate change. The combination of these factors make a strong case for reducing urban car central parking. And now, benefit from exercise in daily life reduces the likelihood of illnesses caused by obesity. Choosing from the many options for active travel enables people to combine their daily business with getting the continual low-level exercise, the low-level exercise that keeps them healthy. Increased adoption of active travel also generates the health benefits of social interaction. Reducing health problems caused by the stress of getting about. A more equitable approach to the use of urban space will lead to be more efficient road systems and reduced levels of traffic congestion, making the experience of travel more agreeable and saving people time and money. Fewer concerns about road safety and respiratory illnesses. The reduced dominance of motor vehicles in denser urban environments leads to a significant health benefits, leads to significant health improvements for all the other users of public space, with better air quality and less need to concentrate on avoiding traffic accidents. This one's Warsaw. I expect some of you have been there, so that's also a very nice place Oops. And now we're getting to environmental integration. Maximize the health benefits of time spent in green space. Green space must be readily accessible from all dwellings and arranged to suit the varied needs of all members of the community. Seize opportunities to create or extend linear routes for pedestrians and cyclists. These can combine the benefits of significant amounts of exercise on interesting paths with breathing clean air, experiencing biodiversity and potential for social interaction and accessing destinations in other parts of town. Doing so avoids the need to cross roads, risk vehicle accidents, inhale polluted air, or be disturbed by noisy traffic, including emergency vehicles. And lastly, make the most of the natural benefits of green and blue spaces. Incorporate green spaces in the natural and sustainable way. Incorporate green spaces as the natural and sustainable way to moderate extremes of climate. Combine the practical measures with imaginative landscape designs and raise the spirits, helping to provide well-being, mental as well as physical. I'm going to sip some more water. And the picture is in Grantchester, Cambridge. It's actually some friends of mine who are having a sort of autumn time, and it just seemed to be a nice way of showing about environmental integration. Right, in community empowerment. So this is the last of the principles. Community involvement with participatory initiatives. Collaborating with people with an appetite for community activism and campaigning on local issues is a rewarding experience that can produce positive outcomes and lead to increased cohesion among citizens. Enjoyable public events can reinforce civic pride and celebrate the contributions of local people. Addressing inequality and social interaction. Strengthen community cohesion by encouraging people in need of help to sign up for bottom-up support schemes such as asset-based community development. That stands for ABCD, asset-based community development, and time banking. These can empower participants to gain in confidence, make new contacts, and help one another by reciprocating on the skills they can offer. And reducing the effects of loneliness and isolation. Meeting other people in a supportive context and encouraging social diversity and inclusiveness can increase people's confidence enough to engage in social interaction. Productive shared activities such as gardening and adult education programs generate new experiences and expand horizons. And these pictures are of Capitol Hill, which is in Seattle. And as you can see, it shows this public park that itself has got a whole story about it, but I'm not going to talk about it now. You can see it sort of shows it as something that's peaceful, but also the same space can be a protest. And that's all part of this community participation thing. And I think we're getting near the end. This is the last slide. And it says, where next? And it goes on to say, our future and that of the planet is uncertain and unpredictable. Technology does not alter people's basic needs, and 21st century progress combines major advances with unexpected consequences. In other words, they're not always good consequences. City centre space continues to be at a premium, and too much emphasis is placed on shopping and consumption, as opposed to the overall experience of spending time in the public realm, but not consuming anything except enjoying it. And so this may be sort of wishful thinking, I suppose, but anyway, pushing on an open door, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. progressive city planners around the world are narrowing roads and dismantling one-way systems and gyratories. They are restoring urban structures to their former logic as spaces to be shared by all users and not just mechanisms to speed motor cars on their way. In London, the congestion charge and expensive parking fees are helping to rebalance the way urban space is used. And the gains in quality, vibrancy, and economic energy are enough for people to forego the so-called luxury of driving into the city centre. Overcoming challenges to help us feel in control of our environment is life enhancing. The evidence regarding the urban planning challenges we face speaks for itself and points to realistic remedies within our grasp. This puts us in a position to make step-by-step progress towards the improvement of health and well-being, using it as a basis for framework set out by the principles of healthy placemaking. So this is, I'm saying thank you, as you can see, and this is this reflecting mirror roof in Marseille. I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's a great thing. You watch everybody's faces upside down as well. Anyway, on that basis, I will say thank you and goodbye.
Thank you so much. Don't leave us yet. We might have some questions for you. So, yeah. Right. In a way, you were supposed to be first, but in a way, it's quite interesting that you come after Diego, and maybe if people can switch the cameras on as well, because you really talk about the sort of implications, environmental, health and well-being, societal implications of this very sort of car-focused infrastructures that we tend to have in our cities and the implications of that. And I think that's sort of a very good reminder about the scale that also Diego was working on, and his huge efforts to shift things around. Could I ask, are you still there, Fred? Yes, so maybe
I'm trying to
you kick off with,
I was going to get rid of the screenshot, and that's another little challenge.
Oh yeah, because you're still sharing. You now just can click the same button that it says share screen. I think it says you can stop sharing it there.
It says new share. It says you are screen sharing. Let's see what happens. Oh, here we go again.
On your tab, on the box that was always in the way, does it not say stop sharing on there somewhere?
Pause share.
Stop?
Well, I can try. No, that's not doing any.
Raul, can you
stop share? No, that's it. That's got it.
Yeah.
When I did the first bit, it did the second bit, but it wasn't giving me that in the first place.
Yeah. But so maybe we hand over now to co-chair Francesco as well, but also from the audience, we don't have a huge number of participants, but the session is recorded. If there's any questions, please put them in the chat for either one of our speakers, or any reflections or comments. But also you can unmute as well, because we're quite a small group, so we're happy to take questions through just coming live. Switch the camera on or not, or just unmute yourself. But otherwise, I think Francesco might have some questions for Diego to begin with as well.
Yes, indeed. And thanks, Fred, for your presentation. Really dense of really great points and ideas. And in a way, I have a question for Diego, but somehow connects to one thing that Fred was showing in the graph of people enjoying it, but it's still not healthy. So I think in many ways we are in this situation where we know maybe what we should do, but we're still not doing it. And in Belgium is the 4 walls and a garden, and how that's stands against the climate crisis and everything. So the question for Diego would be how those and thanks Diego, by the way, for your presentation and great graphics of I think it was very great ways to make manifold strategies to present them in a very clear way. So there were complex strategic plans, but shown very clearly. The question would be then, how do they go down to the people? And when you have those workshops and so on, there were policies that might be not easily digested, like the shift in building rights, or change in functions from one village to the next, and so on. So yeah, how has been people's reaction to those changes, that even if they come for the good, and agree in that way?
Yeah, indeed, like the scale of the projects we work on, they are by default heavily political, because that's why for me it was important to show how the politics, the territory is politically organized, because of course you have a very big challenge in the implementation of this kind of visions, because they are all in one way or another political. And when you think about these strategies, they are strategies that really take a lot of time. So we need to, in order to influence the way people behave, it won't happen in one political period. It will take 20, 30. So there are always visions of a lifespan or a scope of 30 years. And of course, they are very difficult to sustain, because politically, you have shorter political periods. Therefore, to have a vision to push forward that is to have a results in 30 years, while actually the biggest sacrifices you have to do it within your political period, doesn't make anybody happy. And that's indeed a big challenge. What we try to do, it's to use design and to use our plans and to use every single opportunity we have, methods. It's to not to talk about a definite future that will be somehow accomplished in 30 years, but to talk about scenarios in which people can find their common goals, they can identify their own challenges together, and they can start to establish dialogue models. That's for me the most important, is that people is able to speak to each other around the same ideas. And we as urbanists, we just try to make these visually understandable, to make stories, to try to create a very easy way to transmit ideas. So people then can, from different levels, they can come together and find synergies. Because at the end, that's actually the challenge of implementation, is how do you combine efforts from many levels, from the bottom up to the top down, towards a common goal. And urbanism is just a medium, is a tool to do it. It is not as in the 50s that urbanism was an ultimate figure or goal. This is not the case anymore.
Thank you for your answer.
That just reminds me of something to do with that question of politics, which I'm useless at politics actually, but we've certainly, one of the experiences we had, which was for a community planning event that we did in Essen in Germany. And because there's always this problem with politicians, which is that they've only got a few years usually before they have to, they get changed, you know. So, and one of the things that happens is that whatever they've just been trying to achieve gets, you know, the first thing that the other politicians do, the party or whatever, they'll just get rid of it to have their one instead. Mm-hmm. And the way we tried to overcome that was we had a whole series of separate meetings with the different people within the different with the different politicians in Essen. So these weren't local people, but they were the people in charge. And we basically explained what we were trying to do and said, look, can we make this beyond politics? Because, you know, we want to make this a better place, and we don't want to lose it by keeping on having it changed all the time and never getting anywhere. So I just think that's something that can be very useful if it's possible to do that. And in that case, you know, they did do it, and a fantastic project got done as a result of that.
Well, indeed, actually, what is important is to really identify which are the actors that will implement a project. So the politicians are actors, are very important ones, but are not the only ones. They have a role to play within their own limitations of time or a power they could get. But there are other people that also play a role. So the challenge is actually to find the right partnerships that could like foster this continuity, and not to put everything on the shoulders of only one actor.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Indeed, thank you for both answers. Yeah, and at the end, I mean, politicians, they have a short-term goal, but then that Sunday might stay actually long, and so sorry, I have a puppy at home if you might hear some screaming. But yeah, and anyway, that's the goal, the long-term vision, and that's why also the whole conversation around climate change is really, you know, a difficult one, because it's something that involves changing so many levels, and then on the long term, even if actually it has to happen now in the short term, because we're running out of time. But are there other questions regarding today's presentation? So Sophie or Raul, would you like to say something?
No.
Thank you. So for me, what is interesting now is in that we are. It's always important, no, to consider, no, the impact, no, of those urban design, no, that scale, no, from the top to the bottom, no. But my question is, no, related with what is mainly focused for Diego. What are the main barriers you have found when implementing this project?
Well, the implementation itself is a challenge, and it's the place, is the gap actually that we still have, and is a limitation of planning. Because as I was saying with my last slide, is that planning tools are that are already defined. They are even sometimes drafted in law how they should be applied, but there is a limit in which these tools they can go, and they often stop before the implementation phase. So the barrier is, or the challenge is, how to be able to make a vision that is easily appropriated by the people who will implement it, which is not us, and it's not the politicians nor the regions. They will be the operators, the developers, the communities. So this transfer of knowledge, of message, and of values are actually the point to make, or this articulation is the point to make things being operational. And we lack actually of these kind of operational tools. I think these are something that should come as well from the bottom, and a sort of meeting point between both. And in that sense, this is the place or the space we need for innovation. So we need experimentation, we need resources for experimentation, and we need pilot projects in order to be able to promote new ways of doing things, new ways of creating business models that are really interesting, to implement new ways of doing a city. One of the big challenges is, for instance, is real estate development, because real estate development is often taken within very large enterprises that have been there for a long time, that have centuries of existence. And of course, they have a way of doing things. They have a really business that works for them, it gives the profit they need, and they don't want to take risks. So when you want to shift a type of behavior, and you don't have these actors on your side, is of course very difficult. We need to find ways in which these kind of actors, they are able to also take risk and innovate in their business model. So operationally wise, these projects could be implemented, and they are also feasible. That's also very important.
To me, it also strikes me, and I'm just very conscious of time, but we don't seem to get any questions, but it's sort of, it's a slow process, right? Green transition is a slow process to get people along with us and to make this significant change at infrastructure level and across whole regions in the country. And it strikes me that we don't have time. You know, we need it now. We needed it yesterday. We needed it 30 years ago. And we're still struggling to take people with us, to have those tools, to have all of those people with, you know, and all the politics as well and the short-term nature. And I don't know what the key is. How do we create this transition, this cultural change? I think Fred experienced that a little bit when he was speaking at the ACT seminar in Finland. And he covered so many things. And the questions he mostly had was about cars, because people do not want to give up their cars, despite the fact of all the benefits of doing so. And it's just that people feel really quite passionate about certain things, even though they're really damaging to our environment, which damages us in the short and long term. And I just don't know what the answer is of how to create a much faster kind of green transition. And it worries me that we are going way too slow. We're doing things far too slow, but how do we speed things up? I do not know. And how do we speed up and still do things well and take people with us? It's a little bit like, I'm sometimes trying to think, what could we learn from the pandemic, the coronavirus? You know, from literally almost overnight, we went from normal life to working from home, where people could, wearing masks, washing hands, closure of places. We had no choice. We were told. Yet somehow people, most people accepted it and could see the benefit for the community and their own health. And yet somehow we don't do these things for climate crisis. And I don't know how, because it's also politically, it's very difficult, but at the same time, it was done for the pandemic. It showed that what is possible politically in a very short space of time. And I don't know if there's lessons that we can learn to convince the community that actually certain top-down decisions people can buy into because they can see why it's needed. And I don't think we've been very good at that. But I don't know if you want to have any reflections on that. I'm literally just thinking of like, how can we speed up this? It's urgent and we're not going with the urgency that we really need to go. Opening is up to anybody in the audience as well.
Ed, would you like to say something?
Well, yeah, it's back, you know, you're quite right, Sophie, about cars. And, you know, they have an extreme effect. And one of the things I realized is that people sort of think of them as something that are sort of had always been there. And
they're right.
That's, you know, that's what we're here for, is to drive cars all over the place. When you look back on it, you'll see there's less than 100 years before people were driving everywhere and they were going around in lots of other ways instead. And you sort of think, if you could sort of point out, look, mate or madam, you don't have to you know, assume that that's what life's all about. Not least, as we're already saying, that it causes all sorts of problems for us in any way, in many ways. So whether somehow one could get people to understand, rather than thinking about it being something that is current, that they should realize that it's something that only had a short time in itself and had its own problems associated with it. So that's what and if we could get people to understand, they can't expect that that's what it's going to be like. Because even now, with the fossil fuel cars being removed, potentially, the electric ones are still being put in. They have particulate matters and all sorts of things. And mainly they just, toxic air in cities. You know, there are all these things that still need to be done, but that's not stopping people thinking, oh, I've got to have a car, so I'll get an electric one now, because at least that's better than a fossil fuel one. So, you know. Yeah,
just as this places the problem from the whole planning and the infrastructure point of view, in the way we move around in cities, it still has an impact, huge embodied carbon. It also becomes very exclusive owning a car. I'm probably one of the few Belgians who I never learned to drive because I used my bike and a little motorbike for ages. And then in London, I walked and cycled, not a huge amount because it's not very safe, but public transport. And I still cannot drive in my 40s. So, you know, I never learned, I never had to. And that's almost like, for me, that's normal. But yeah, it's a real issue. I can see maybe Diego, you want to respond, but we do actually have somebody from the audience.
Aura raise a hand if Aura would like to say something.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think about the cars, like I just read that like cars somehow, like the current people, it represents something that they want, like freedom. So like I read an article where they talked about the idea of how to like create this idea of freedom with other things such as railways and other measures like making better biking lanes and that kind of stuff. So like for old people, it's a really hard thing in Finland to when they can't drive anymore because they feel like they lose their freedom. So like, yeah, structuring the city differently to create freedom without using cars is an interesting idea. Just came out from what you were talking about.
In that sense, I don't think when you imagine this idea of freedom, but when you're stuck in traffic, I think it's the opposite. You are a prisoner in a small bubble. Actually, the real freedom is walking. If you're able to walk everywhere, then you're free. You don't need a car to go anywhere and to get whatever you want.
It's true, and I don't own a car, but like I think it's what car represents.
Yeah.
And it's also, as Billy says in the chat, to be a status symbol for some people as well. And then, of course, the issue is you need to then provide good walking and other facilities. And often we want people to give something up before we have the other infrastructure in place, like safe cycling, safe walking, and so on. Yeah. And then, of course, also climatically, people often use Amsterdam and, you know, the Netherlands and other examples. People cycle, look, can be done, but it's very flat. You know, as soon as you actually go to other cities, it's much, much harder to do that. Or the climate is either too hot or extremely cold. Isn't it in Cento in Italy? A lot of people, you go there and everybody cycles, but it's in a valley, it's very flat there. And then it gets much, much harder in other Italian cities to you know, encourage that. So yeah, so I think there's also those things we have to be very, and same with Copenhagen, a lot of like Flanders, people cycle is pretty flat. So it's, you know, it's
with electric bicycles, that means that it's much easier for people. You know, there's no excuse not to go up a steep hill because the thing will do it for you.
Yeah, but yeah, I still wouldn't do it in the snow, but yeah.
In any case, I think it's not about replacing the car absolutely and making them disappear. It's about balancing better. No, it's about really having a multimodality, to have a choice which is efficient. And then if you have poor weather conditions, you still have a chance to take a good bus, a tram, or eventually your car. But it's not the only one solution.
Yeah, the primary choice. Yeah.
And that's about also the investment, public investment on infrastructure. So instead of investing on making highways, let's just invest that money in other things and then balance the whole infrastructure so we can have choices.
Yeah, and I think what's really important about this, and I think that's both your talks came out to me quite clearly, is that ultimately there's these huge environmental benefits, but also huge benefits to our health and well-being. And the other thing is actually one of the reasons, and I don't often talk about this, and we're still being recorded, so I'll be careful how I frame it, but ultimately one of the reasons why I actually cannot drive is not through choice. I have no money. You know, to take driving lessons costs money. You needed access to a car. I had no access to a car. I never learned it when I was young. That's why in Belgium, most people can drive. So the whole notion of mobility is also one of the inclusivity or exclusivity. And if we build everything around, as I think Aura was saying, as soon as people age, they feel they lost their freedom because they can no longer drive. And that suddenly then becomes, you know, the world shrinks a lot and we exclude people from fully taking part in society and in city life. And that is then when suddenly you're older, but that could also be when actually you don't necessarily have the income to do that. And I think we also have to be much, much more inclusive in our planning for that reason. To have that diversity of mobility gives that inclusivity much more. Of course, with COVID, I do think I have then hardly moved around. You know, we literally then went in lockdown. We've been working from home, and then public transport wasn't exactly very appealing. And then those of us using public transport were at higher risk than people in their cars, in their box. You know, so there's also kind of these shifts happening as well. But I would dread to think that often people think of it that, well, we just replace our car with like a hybrid car or with an electric car, and we solve the problem. Look how ecological we are. But actually, that isn't really the transition we need. We need something much, much more radical than that. And this is just cars, one example of this. I think is throughout our consumption patterns need a massive shift.
Actually, if I can connect indeed to the question of how to accelerate the transition, I think that actually we need maybe some shocks to, you know, like COVID, of course, was one shock. But then what also Diego was showing, the last summer floods in Germany and Belgium, that was quite a shock. I was really in disbelief watching those images, and imagine, of course, if your house was going down the river in your life with that. So I think, unfortunately, we will see some of those, more of those shocks, and then, well, everybody will have to react, because I'm sure that people.
And it's too late, right? This is the thing, that we're being reactive rather than proactive.
People affected by that events, I think they are not. I wouldn't say maybe voting the same way, but they're not thinking about the climate change the same way. They're thinking about something.
Yeah, it's real. It's close to them. I think, unfortunately, I actually think, Francesco, you might be right. And I remember we were discussing this when I was doing my PhD at UCL, and one of our professors said, the disasters at the moment that are related to the climate crisis are too far away, too removed from Western Europe. And we were going to need a big shock, a big crisis, something big happening before there will be a shock, unfortunately. And even now, 5-6 years later, we're still not. It is sort of more in people's minds. People can see the connections, but it's hard to make a difference, to change our day-to-day lives very consciously, because we're not set up for it. We also don't necessarily have the infrastructures. As you can see with Diego, you have these research by design projects, and then all the partners involved to try to make it happen. That it's a slow process, and some of it might never even happen, unfortunately. Yet that is exactly what we need to be doing, accelerate towards that. And as long as we don't, we are going to get more of these shocks and more of these disasters. Particularly Belgium, Flanders is also part of a low-lying part of the world. So yeah, it's hugely affected.
Yeah, indeed, I totally agree. It is going to happen in any case. Now the climate change is irrevocable, so now we can only mitigate, which means that all these events will happen more often, and this will accelerate. I think people already are conscious, very timid sometimes, but are conscious about the implication of their behavior within the whole effect on the planet. I think these shocks will accelerate this, unfortunately, but that also has to be managed in a very strong way by governments. So it's not only governments as managers of the crisis, but also as proactive actors in the mitigation of crises with a very strong hand, even if sometimes it's not popular. So they need to dare to have unpopular decisions when it's needed, responsible and unpopular, and then maybe sacrifice their political career if needed. But we need strong policies. That's also a complement.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that, I think you're right, and it's unpopular. And I think there's then a problem between different governments. I think there's much greater trust in the Finnish government, for example, in the Nordic region than there is in Belgium, and the politicians in Belgium, and the division between the languages in the different regions that you started out with, which in a way was slightly strange for me to start your talk, but it totally makes sense in the scheme of what you're trying to achieve and the complexity of this, that you cannot work without acknowledging that political framework you work within. Yeah, I completely agree with you that this is going to be really important, but it also depends on trust. And maybe the politicians in Belgium are the best messengers in that case. We have something in the chat coming, a long message. Raul, do you maybe want to, or unless Eva wants to unmute and join?
She says she cannot talk, she wrote, but...
okay, I didn't read to the bottom because...
Yeah, the question is long, but connects really well with what Diego just said. And the question is really how cities initiatives or let's say politicians in the cities, how can they push the transition, and should they take more drastic action towards reducing car consumption and so on? And then Eva was saying, I personally believe that clear and proactive governmental and city policies are essential, as people will struggle to make the green choice. Maybe rethinking our cities through the lenses of circularity could open new opportunities and help us transition to a more sustainable existence.
So they're actually confirming, yeah, exactly, that it's sort of the initiative, or the, you know, it sort of has to, and the encouragement has to actually come from the bigger level, so that we can have this nudge architecture, encourage people to make the right choices, I think. And that's at the moment, a lot of leadership is missing in that area, I would say, unfortunately. And as Diego, you also said, some unpopular decisions have to be made. In London, for example, Fred, do you remember? Sorry to keep coming back to cars, but I think that car is one emotive, but also a very good example of our consumption habit, our polluting habits, and that affects our health and well-being. And yet our whole lives are sort of set up around it. It's like we have an addiction to it. Do you remember, Fred, in London, when we had our mayor, Ken Livingstone, who ended up setting up the first congestion charge, and how unpopular that initial decision was, and then in the end how everybody could see it was the right decision once it was done. That was at least my impression of it when I was in London at the time. I think there's some noises made as well about the second congestion charging, and that's an issue, but the first zone, he made some really unpopular decisions to keep cars out of London. And actually,
I can explain a bit, because I was at a conference on one occasion, and it was pointed out, because there's an organization called Ipsos Mori who they do what's it called, you know, polling, and essentially, if it had been done on a public consultation, it wouldn't have got through. It was only because it was top down that it got through at all. So that is the headline in that respect. And the other is, yes, I think there was a phase when it became it got widened up, but the Tories reduced it down again, I think. But actually now the Mayor of London has been going for this ultra low zone of, of parking of vehicles, which is also another one. So there are things happening. But
would you say that people, if it had been a survey and bottom up, it would never have happened? But now the first congestion charge, I'm talking about the first one, and the central city area, that my impression then was, once it was there, people actually could see how much better that was when you went into the city, as most of us pedestrians and public transport users, that there was actually then real support for it once it was in place, once people knew what it meant. That was my impression, but I don't know what your impression. Are people still against it now it's in place, the first central?
I think it's understood that there are some things that could perhaps be better, but overall I think it's understood that it's much better this way.
And that's the difficulty, isn't it, in managing? And I think Mariam had a question, maybe you should check in with her, maybe that's the last bit, but I think that's also the difficulty between the top down and the bottom up, that we're asking people to give their opinion on things, but actually I'm not saying that people cannot decide, but it's also what we're used to. And if you're going to lose something, why would you vote for that? You're okay with it, you know? And it's not often until, I'm also sort of thinking a little bit of, and Diego will know what I mean, when you showed the picture of the houses, the street or the back of the houses, and people start building extra stuff to it, right? And then in Belgium, this is so common, and it happens everywhere. And there seem to be very few planning laws that people also stick to. But actually, when then people see a properly designed house by an architect, they might go, oh my God, these have got such good light. And they really appreciate the spatial quality. But it's not until they see it and have been in it that they can actually experience it and think, maybe I would do it differently as well, my own home. And so it's because it's abstract as well. And I don't know how we break through that as well as a community. But Mariam, if you're still there and you had your hand raised at some point. If you
yes. Hi. I had a question. The only definition that I have from sustainable development in my mind is that we should live our life in a way that we save the things that we have for the next generation. So we are talking some abstract point, this people that are not here or not alive yet. And when you're asking people to save something for somebody that they don't know, they might not do it. So, and when we are asking politicians to do something for this next generation, they don't care because they are here for the people who are hearing them. So
and who voted for them.
Now, when we are seeing the crisis, maybe they think that, okay, as a politician, we should stop this flood, we should stop this pollution. But again, they are thinking about now and the limited view that they have during their political life. But for the changes that we want, we should somehow, they should understand that this next generation is themselves, but a little bit older.
Or their grandchildren.
Imaginary people from future.
Yeah.
Maybe in that point, I think maybe they should work. But yeah, I mean, the definition is kind of wrong for the time that we are living in. Maybe in the 19th century or I mean, the late 20th century that they were defining these things, it was okay. But for now, does it a right definition for sustainable development or sustainable architecture?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a good point. I'm not sure, and I'd like to hear what the others think as well. I'm not sure we really use it in a literal definition of it's only for the next generation, but it's definitely the case, I think, that if we can show the co-benefits of maybe it isn't about, maybe it's about, look, this is better for everybody, your health and well-being, therefore, but it also happens to be good for the climate crisis. You know, we can adapt and maybe that's when people then buy into it because it's for their benefit, like the pandemic, right? And it's not like you have to do this for, well, actually a lot of it was you have to do this for the community and people that are, might get severely ill, even if you don't. But I do think, this question of how do we give a future generation or the current young people who don't have a voice in this, because they will be even more affected.
Well, I think that, you know, there is quite a lot of evidence that the younger generations are much more involved. They're much less likely to buy a car, for instance, and they've got, you know, and they've got enough reasons to think about other ways of using their lives. And yeah, I definitely feel as if that's at least one area of something that can actually happen well, you know, and all these rebellious people who've been doing things, you know, they're doing it because they keep on saying, look, just because I'm sitting on a motorway and stopping the traffic, it's because the politicians or nobody else is actually dealing with it. And they're, you know, so they get arrested and so on. But I think, you know, they're just being very serious about something that other people are actually not taking sufficiently seriously. And, you know, this climate crisis thing that we're having, you know, the conference that's happening in a few days' time, that is also showing signs of people that are still back to their own ways of misbehaving, of being interested in their own ideas rather than trying to share it out amongst lots of people.
Yeah, that's the other thing, isn't it, Mariam? I think it's also related to, it's not maybe just even the future generations, but also the global community and our responsibility as a global citizen. This isn't just about, well, we're in Europe, we can probably afford, as Diego said, the adaptation measures we will now need to climate change. We can afford them, we can look after our own, forget about the people that literally will lose their land in Bangladesh or in the Pacific, even though we caused them to lose their land. So we're also not really, we're not good at looking after and being empathetic to the future generation, but we're not even doing it to people that exist today that we don't know, that are thousands of miles away, and that we have, frankly, a huge debt to, because they didn't cause this, yet they are massively affected by it. And this is on our conscience, and actually we don't seem to care enough. And that for me is, yeah, so why would we even care about the future generation, right? If we don't even care about our neighbors in another country, when we're just looking at our own, like the politicians look at who voted for them, that we're not doing the right thing for the global community. Yeah, we're all interconnected. Again, the pandemic, each country kept, like, you could close your, well, the only thing you can do is close your borders and try to keep it out, but even that hasn't been successful. We're so interconnected as a community.
Mm-hmm.
Diego, do you want to have a final word on this, or Francesco, or Raul, or Mariam, if you want to jump back in?
Oh, it's in line with what you're saying. It's indeed a definition that it's maybe not accurate anymore, because it's the effects of all this misbehavior are happening now. It's not for the future generations, are happening every day, everywhere. And we can only, what we have to act now in urgency, we have to react into something. It's not anymore about, let's try to behave well so we can avoid flooding in the future. No, the flooding is happening, we need to adapt or landscapes, or we need to adapt our geography in order to mitigate the damages that the flooding can cause. And that is very expensive and it's at the expense of everybody. So it's something that it's not anymore about the future generations, how to survive today, and how to make not only ourselves survive, but as you say, other people which are far away also be able to survive. It's an emergency.
Yes,
I think that's a really good final note, don't you think, Francesco?
Absolutely, absolutely, exactly. Yes. No, I wanted to add something because when I was listening to what you were saying, and Diego came to my mind, you know, when I was a kid and I was not eating well at home, my mom was saying that you have to finish dinner because there are kids in Africa that are starving, and I'm lucky to have dinner, and I'm not saying that to my kids, and I don't know if you know, we should all remember that, and I don't know if we have literally to go to that example of the less fortunate people in Africa, but in a way, you know, I think that it was a reminder I had every dinner, and I think it's something that we should all remember, you know, and act. And have that very, very clear in our mind that we have to do things because, well, others are suffering already, and the most will suffer if we don't do anyway. So yeah, I think that we should keep that in mind with every action we take.
And I just was maybe I think this is a very good note to end. We don't want to keep people too long. We're half an hour over. I know we had some technical issues as well, but it's dinner time here in Finland. Just want to thank our speakers, but also I would like to take some of this discussion, particularly this definition of sustainability and the future that Mariam brought in, and the sort of global responsibility we have, perhaps through to the ACAN larger group, to also discuss how this can be more part of our vision and something that we can help with to more locally among architects, bring that home and keep reminding people of that as well. So, but thank you everybody who joined us, those of you that might be watching this later. If you got this far, fantastic, well done on the recording. But thank you so much again, Diego, for your inspirational talk, and also Fred. And when I'm in your part of Europe, I will reach out, and it'd be lovely to go for a coffee together and have a chat about your work. And thank you so much.